Hi everyone and welcome back to AXA Coral Live. It's amazing to have you all with us. We are broadcasting from the CARMABI research station on the island of Curacao in the southern Caribbean. We've got some great shout outs, a little bit of housekeeping, and then I will introduce you to today's amazing lesson all about life cycles and baby coral. So, some shout outs. Here we are. A big welcome to the Harpy Eagles, and they're at Kiverton Park Meadows Junior School. Hi, everyone there. To Elsa and Louis, who are amazing homeschoolers who love everything about the natural world. That's fantastic to hear. And lastly, to Year 5 at Clither Primary School, who are watching from their classroom in Newport, South Wales. Really wonderful to have you all with us. So just a couple of notes. Your questions are amazing, and we're going to have a really great question and answer session at the end of this live lesson. All your questions about biology, natural world, coral, great to have those come through. And if you do want to put those in, there's a chat app right next to the video screen on the encounteredu.com website. If you do have any technical issues, there is a chat icon at the bottom right of the web page. Click on that and we'll try and sort your issues as quickly as possible. What I want to do just before we meet the fabulous Dr. Kristen Marhaver is give you a brief introduction to where we are. I mentioned this idea of a research station and science. So this live lesson is all about the science of the coral reef, but more broadly, it's about biology. And biology is the science of the living world. And what is fantastic about CARMABI is it's right next to the part of the natural world that we're studying. So there's homes and offices and laboratories for scientists from around the world to come and stay, and also access to the incredible reef just outside our doors. We're actually in one of the laboratories at the moment. And what that means for scientists, those people who are studying the natural world, is that they can come here, do their studies, do a little bit more study in the laboratory, and have all that joined together. Now, it's with great delight that I welcome Dr. Kristen Marhaver, one of the fantastic scientists here at CARMABI.
Hi, Jamie.
And welcome to Coral Live. Fantastic to have you with us.
I'm so glad to be back. I'm so glad you're back. So glad we have our audience back. Hello, everyone out there who's watching us live. I'm so glad you're here to talk about corals today.
It's such a fantastic part of our natural world. It's very far from a lot of the schools we're talking to. I'm just going to see quick hands up from all the classrooms. Can we have a big hands up if you've watched Finding Nemo or another film? Higher, I know you need, and higher in the classroom too. So that's quite a few of you there. Quite a few of you. This amazing underwater world. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at the coral reef, but we're also going to be looking at really two really important ideas in biology, the study of living things, and that's how something reproduces, makes more of itself, I think.
How something reproduces.
And how something grows.
And how something grows.
Okay, can we do reproducing and growing?
We're going to do both of those, but we're going to do that with corals, which reproduce in a surprising way and they grow in a surprising way.
Brilliant. Before we start, just a refresher of what the coral reef looks like, because it's just on our doorstep here, just out here. And we've got some great shots of the reef. I know that we've been out, you've been out. How would you describe what the young people might be seeing on this sort of reef? I mean, we've got these sort of brains on the bottom, we've got these elk horn shapes, you know, sort of almost tree-like things. What are young people seeing when they look at these sort of images, these video of the reef?
If you go to a coral reef, at first, everything might look very surprising and very new. it's very different than the worlds that we usually live in our houses, in our cities, our communities, parks, forests. It's really different than that. There are big schools of colorful fish swimming around. There are maybe big predators like a shark or a dolphin or a whale swimming around. The bottom of the reef is covered in thousands and thousands of different animals, a lot of them with weird names like sponge or tunicate or coral. But if you zoom back a little bit, it's kind of just like a forest or like a city. There's something growing, there's animals eating, there's animals interacting, there's animals taking care of their babies. So it's just an underwater city or an underwater forest with thousands of different animals and plants and species that are all cooperating.
And what I find amazing, when you see that for the first time, you think it just exists. But it's in fact created by an animal. Yesterday we talked with classes about what is coral, and we found out that it's in fact an animal that makes all these incredible structures. And today we're going to delve a little bit more into the process, the science process of this reproducing and growing that takes us to this.
Exactly. So if you are in a forest or say a park with a bunch of trees, the trees are building most of the structure. They're building the things that give you the shade, and they're building the habitat for the birds. But the really cool thing about coral reefs is that coral animals, are building most of the structure. So how does an animal build a coral reef? How do corals build coral reefs? That's what we're going to talk about today.
And in terms of animals growing and animals reproducing, that's something that's on the test, isn't it? That, primary school biology, we have this idea of a chicken to a chick to an egg, or an egg to a tadpole to a frog. We have that idea already. Is that something that we can help use to guide us through this?
We can start there. We
Okay.
could start with a chicken and an egg and a baby chick, but then it gets really different and pretty surprising. So part of what we are learning about today is the fact that not everything makes babies the way a chicken makes babies.
Okay.
Corals have a few surprises in the process of making baby corals.
Super exciting. This extraordinary underwater habitat, this environment with all these colors and everything. It starts how?
Where does it come from?
The
Yeah,
chicken
is
or
it
the
the
egg?
chicken or the
The egg,
egg?
yeah.
I think that's still a debate, whether it's the chicken or the egg. Where does it come from? Well, at some point, a baby coral landed somewhere in the ocean and started to grow. And that coral might have survived for 10 years, 100, 1,000 years.
Wow.
Now imagine that happened with lots of corals, lots of other animals, over and over and over for a really long time. That's how you get a coral reef. But that process of that first little baby coral, or a new baby coral joining a coral reef, is it's very tiny and it's very slow. So it's hard to imagine in our heads, how can you get a coral reef, a huge coral reef from tiny babies? But today we get to show you some videos of exactly how that happens.
Amazing. So you study something called spawning. So we know about frog spawning. So what can we do corals do the same thing?
Do corals do the same thing as frogs? Kind of.
Okay.
We're just going to throw surprises all the way through here. It would be as if a frog spawned 100,000 eggs all at once, and then instead of staying in a little puddle, turning into tadpoles, all those eggs just went out into the ocean in 100,000 different places, and they had to find their way back to a safe place to live. So it's kind of similar, except the eggs just go all over the place. And I think Ellie is going to show you a video of what coral spawning looks like. So we have this idea that a coral is a big animal. It's living on the bottom of the ocean, and when a coral releases its eggs, it releases a bunch of eggs out of its mouth because it's just got a mouth. So it spits a bunch of eggs out of its mouth, and those eggs go into the water in the sea, and they start to swirl around in the currents, and those bundles of eggs will break apart into individual eggs, and then those will get fertilized in the water column, and they'll start the process of turning into a baby coral.
Amazing. And so an egg is a type of cell, which is sort of, for those of you who haven't come across cell in biology, is a sort of building block of life?
It all starts with one cell.
Okay.
A seed is one cell. You know, when you plant a seed and it grows into a plant or grows into a tree, it's almost this, it's a really similar process. You start with the egg, gets fertilized by male reproductive cells, and then you've got one cell, and it's got to grow into a whole baby. And so that means that that one cell divides into two, and then those two cells each divide into two, and that goes on and on and on. So for corals, this happens in the water, at the surface of the ocean, swirling eggs in the currents, and Ellie's going to cue up a video of what it looks like when those cells, that one egg, starts to divide into lots and lots of cells. So they're all at the surface of the water, they're fertilized, and then they start to divide. One cell goes into two cells, goes into four, and on and on and on. And this takes about a day. It can take 2 days, it can take 3 days. And that whole process goes from one single cell to thousands, but still about the same size. I guess this is where we should also give a sense of scale. This coral egg, this one cell, it's the size of about one fingerprint groove.
Oh, wow.
So if you look at your fingerprint and look at one groove, maybe 1.5 grooves, that's how small this is when it starts.
Amazing.
And it divides into thousands of cells that are even tinier. And that's the first step in it becoming a coral baby. And
then, I mean, what's fantastic about being here in the laboratory is that when you're studying something like the larval stage, which I think is the next stage we're going to talk about, before we show the video, we'll talk about some of the science equipment, which is really useful to understanding how living things work.
That's a great point. How are we studying something the size of one fingerprint groove? How can we learn anything about that when it's so tiny? Well, luckily we have cool tools that help us see things that are really, really small. One of those tools is a microscope.
Okay.
And then one of those tools is a camera that knows how to take lots and lots of pictures on its own. So we're going to show you, in a second, we're going to show you a video of the next stage of the coral life cycle.
Okay.
But first we're going to show you how we took the video. So the next stage in the life cycle is that the cells, thousands of cells, they organize themselves into a larva. It's like a swimming teardrop with hair on the outside.
Okay.
And it's a baby coral. It's a little tiny swimming wormy kind of thing, still just one fingerprint groove wide, but it has all of the tools to turn into a humongous coral if it can find the right place on the reef to live. And that's a huge mystery in science. How do corals find their way to the reef, and how do they attach, and how do they grow into their first little polyp? I had never seen that before in this lab, even though I've been working here for years, until this year we managed to capture a video of a coral larva swimming and searching for a place to attach, and then actually attaching on video. So Ellie's showing you Ellie showed you the video of the larva swimming around.
Yep.
We're going to look at the science equipment that lets us follow those coral larvae through time, and then we're going to show you the video, the first one I ever managed to take, of a coral larva swimming and searching and searching and sticking onto a surface.
Amazing.
So we're going to check out this cool microscope that's behind me, and then we're going to show you how a microscope and a camera can take 8,000 photos while I'm at home and turn them all into one video of hours and hours of time smooshed into a tiny amount of time.
Brilliant.
So let's check out this cool microscope, because one of my favorite parts of science is the cameras and the gadgets and the microscopes. So Ellie's bringing her macro camera over here. We have what kind of just looks like a regular microscope. Look in here, and you can focus here. And this microscope is pointed at this little tiny purple disc. I can actually point with my finger so you can see how small it is. So right in front of my fingernail is a baby coral. Remember those 2 fingerprint grooves? So one of those tiny, tiny little specks is a baby coral. And we can't see this very well with our eyes, and I definitely can't sit here overnight taking 8,000 photos of it. But what we do is we have a camera do the work for us. So at the top of this microscope, if we go straight up, there's actually a 3rd place to look, and this is where the camera watches. So here on this camera, our baby coral is right here, and that was a camera taking a photo. Every 20 seconds, it takes 1 picture. And then when we come back in the morning, we can ask the camera to take 8,000 photos and turn it into a video that's 1 or 2 minutes long. So in the end, every second of the video shows 8 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes of what the coral was doing. So now that you've seen how small it is and how we capture the video, we're going to show you a video of this coral last week deciding where it was going to attach on that ceramic tile, showing it searching across the tile, trying out a few places, and then finally choosing a place to attach. And you'll see it go from kind of a worm shape searching to like a little dumpling that attaches. Okay, here we go. It's searching around, it's trying some places. Oh, not that one, not that one. There it goes. So it was moving fast, and then it chose one spot to attach, and it stuck. And that's the place that it's going to stay forever. It can, when a coral baby chooses a spot to live on a reef, it can stay there for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. That's a lot. That's a lot of years.
That's a huge amount of years.
It's a huge amount of years.
Huge amount of years, and difficult to really consider in terms of sort of human existence. It finds its place on the reef. We've gone almost from the egg to the tadpole stage, the sort of larval stage. What then happens to make this amazing underwater sort of landscape that provides home for so many different living things?
Yeah, we still are just one tiny dot the size of a fingerprint groove, and we still have to grow a whole coral reef. So there are a couple more really important steps. The next thing that the coral is going to do is it's going to grow, just like a baby, just like a plant that you planted from a seed. So Ellie has a video of that baby coral starting as a really tiny little polyp and growing bigger and bigger and bigger. So we call this the polyp stage because it's now properly shaped like a coral polyp. It's growing its tentacles, has a little tiny mouth in the middle, and then underneath it's also growing a skeleton. So it would be like you swam all through the ocean and then searched and then picked a place to sit. Mm-hmm. And then you grew sort of arms all the way around your head. And then you started to make a skeleton, but it was underneath you, and then you just kept adding to it.
Incredible. And I think you've got some of the coral skeletons behind us as well. But this is just settling down. It's growing a skeleton underneath itself, and it's then growing. It just becomes a huge
polyp. Then what? Does it just become a huge polyp?
Yeah. Does it just keep on eating, and this becomes like a
one mouth the size of the room?
Yeah.
No.
No, because that's what happens with lots of animals. They just get bigger and bigger, and then they're an adult size, and then that's kind of it.
That's true, yeah. A small chick grows into a bigger chicken, and you're pretty much there. Or a small tree grows into a bigger tree, and you've got it. Corals have a trick. They decided a long time ago that it was going to be even easier to grow a coral reef if they made copies of themselves. So, Jamie, imagine that you are at the bottom of the ocean,
Yep.
stuck to the bottom,
Okay.
and you've got your arms, your tentacles all the way around your head,
Yes.
and you're making a skeleton underneath you.
Okay.
That part's all very normal, right? But
Yep.
the next part is that you have to make copies of Jamie that grow sort of out of your shoulder and your back and your other shoulder and your chest. And you make a ring of Jamies around you, and then you all cooperate to build the skeleton underneath. That's why I said it was a little different when we started.
What I love about this is that for those young people watching is that the natural world is complicated, is complex. There's so many things to study. There's so many questions that we don't yet know the answers to. And we're, in fact, before this lesson, you're going, you know, some of my baby corals do this, and I wonder whether that's because of 1, 2, 3, and which I really, really like. That there's so many science questions still to answer.
That is true.
But have we got to the stage, my favorite stage? Can we meet some of your baby corals?
Yes. So this is the part where we get to see a baby coral that has done exactly that, make copies of itself all the way around that first polyp. And we're going to feed some and show you how they grow bigger. So if you're going to make a bunch of copies of yourself, you're going to probably want to eat some food. You're going to get hungry in 1,000 years. You know, I get hungry every 1,000 years. I get hungry every 2 minutes.
So I think we've got a choice of, while we get set up, we've got a poll coming up for you, whether we get to feed the star coral, the pineapple coral, or the pillar coral.
Or the
first.
pillar coral.
Okay.
So we're asking you which coral will feed first.
The other ones will get fed later. Don't worry. You're not going to choose about which coral starve, but which one should we choose first? That poll's up, and we'll just get the cameras set up so that you can focus. We can focus in on here, and you can decide which one we're going to feed first.
And one of the really exciting things about these baby corals, if you have been following along with Coral Live over the years, some of these corals were born right before the first Coral Live we did at CARMABI, and now they're 3 years old. So those of you who've been with us over the years, you're getting to see how big these corals can get as they grow from one baby the size of a fingerprint groove to the size of something that you can see with your eyes and the size of something that can build a coral reef.
Amazing.
So let's check them out. Here we go. Ellie's bringing her awesome macro camera over, and we are going to zoom in on all of these baby corals. So I think first we're going to do a little bit of an introduction to who's here. So Ellie's first pointing at, this is the pineapple coral. This is a very rare species that is not well understood, and very few people have ever seen a baby of this species. And you can see my fingernail is about the size of that coral. So when they're 1 or 2 years old, they have grown from fingerprint groove to fingernail size. And next to this pineapple coral, these are 3 different star corals. This is one with really tiny polyps. This one makes much bigger polyps. You can see each individual, this big round circle. There's a little tiny mouth in the middle of each of those circles. And this one, if you give it 1 more year to grow, becomes this big. This one is also one of our star corals. And it's starting to look like a proper coral colony. It's gone from kind of toddler-sized and a little squidgy and a little cartoon-looking to looking like a proper coral. And we've got 2 more in our container here. This one is pillar coral. This is one of my favorites because of how its tentacles move. Can we do that? There we go. This is a very rare species, and it has a hard time reproducing on its own. So we're really proud at CARMABI that we can help grow these and help protect the diversity of this coral. And then finally here at the end, we have this brain coral. This brain coral is more than 3 years old, and you can see the ripples on the side. It's just starting to make shapes that kind of look like a brain coral. So it spent a lot of time just being a big round circle before it started to get this shape. One of my favorite things about this is to see each species grow up to look like its parents. At the beginning, they all kind of just look like little dots, but then they start to become the colors of their parents, and some of them have similar personalities to their parents. So eventually they grow up to look just like their parents did. So we've been...
The scores are in.
The scores are in. Our poll has... We've got the results from our poll.
We're going for star. In a close second, pineapple, and then your favourite pillar. not bringing up a respectable third.
That's a great order. I think star coral sounds like the right way to start. So this is a piece of mussel. Some of you might recognize this because people might eat this in a soup or a stew, or just steamed with some butter and some herbs. But mussels are ocean animals, and they get eaten by other animals in the ocean too. So these little tiny bits of mussel, there's a bunch of protein. So it's really good coral food because they can get a lot of protein to grow big. So we're going to feed the big star coral first, I think is the right way to do this, since we voted for star coral. We'll feed a few different polyps. How about this one looks hungry? There it goes. Oh, look at that. It's moving its tentacles toward its mouth, and it's closing up that one polyp and scooching that piece of food right through its mouth into its gut. Shall we do another one? Let's do this one here. There's another one. I think that one's moving even faster.
And so do these polyps sort of do they have a stomach? Do they digest? Do they what's happening here?
What happens next? They've got a stomach, and that's it. They
Okay.
don't have a digestive system past that. They're just a stomach and a mouth. So the food is in there, and it'll get chewed up and eaten up, and anything that they don't digest just comes straight out their mouth.
Okay.
So if you just ate and then you had to sort of throw up everything that you didn't finish eating, that would be that's kind of what they do.
Okay.
Lots of puking. but it's biology. It's biology puking. So look at how fast those polyps closed up as it ate that food.
And Kristen, sort of, it looks like a collection of sort of luminescent, fluorescent sort of oat flakes. It looks like sort of nascent porridge. What does that look like when it's a sort of a colony, when there's more and more and more of these polyps?
Oh, they really look like their parents now. So if you can imagine each of these corals, but imagine them 10 times bigger, and then imagine them 50 times bigger, and then imagine them 200 times bigger. They'll keep making copies of their polyps and get bigger and bigger and bigger, start to take on mountain shapes or branching shapes. And underneath them is a humongous piece of skeleton. So Ellie can zoom over here and we can show you this one. This is probably 10 or 15 or 20 years old. So the star coral that we just fed is making a skeleton that looks like this. Underneath all that really pretty purple and white and blue tissue, it's making a really heavy, dense skeleton like this. So after 15 or 20 years, you'll still have the coral polyps all growing on the top, but it's leaving behind this huge, huge, heavy skeleton. And that is actually what the reef is made of on the inside. So when you see all the color and shape of a coral reef, most of it is heavy coral skeleton and then little tiny coral polyps working hard to grow more, just sort of on the surface of the reef.
It's absolutely fantastic, Kristen. Thank you so much for sharing. We've got a whole bunch of questions which I'm
All right.
going to get to. But
Great.
Before we go, just while the questions are happening, can you pick one of your corals for our audience to name?
We're going to name one.
Yeah.
Should we name the pineapple coral? That's this one here. This is very special to me because we at CARMABI actually discovered when pineapple coral released their eggs, and we were the first group in the world to grow baby pineapple coral. No one had ever seen one until we raised them in the lab. They'd seen the adults, but no one had ever seen a tiny baby pineapple coral. So yeah, well, let's give this one a name. It's got maybe 2 big polyps and a couple of tiny polyps on the side. It's very yellow. It's got very long tentacles.
So get your ideas for a naming, and we'll have a vote
That's
here
great.
on the best name towards the end of this live lesson.
I can't wait.
So
We'll have to make a really tiny name tag.
so fantastic first lesson. This is from a whole group of people. This is from Elsa and Louis and Archie and the owls at Sparkwell, who would like to know, how long does healthy coral live for?
How long does healthy coral live? There are some tiny little corals that might live for 5 years or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But most corals can live for hundreds of years or 1,000 years, or possibly even more. I think that one study from a woman who studies coral genetics in the US, she thinks that there are some corals still alive that are 5,000 years old.
Because I did hear, that especially deep corals, that they're some of the oldest living things on our planet.
Yes, that makes sense. The deep sea is very dark and it's very cool, and so things are growing more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine if you just grow slowly for a long time,
So
you
I
can
think
get pretty old.
around being sort of born around the same time as the pyramids. So they've been around for some time.
So yeah, a little bit older than us.
Brilliant.
How many? A few hundred times older than us. That's a kind of a way to think about it. Your parents, 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 parent might have been born at the same time as some of the corals that are still underwater today.
Amazing. This is a great question. This is from 5LW at Kiverton. What is the biggest coral in the world?
The biggest coral in the world? I don't know.
I mean, there's the boulder coral, Big Mama, in American Samoa, which is one of the biggest coral colonies in the world. And then I heard someone say that mushroom corals are actually the biggest polyp.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, they can be one coral this big or this big.
Just a single polyp.
I'm going to throw you a surprise answer.
Okay.
There are some corals that can break apart as they're growing, kind of like this one where it makes branches and those branches can break off in a storm. And those pieces can move and roll around. So I told you that first one never moves, but eventually if the branches are big enough or it really gets damaged, pieces of coral can move around. And there are some branching corals where the pieces have broken off and reattached and grown, broken off, reattached and grown. So I think my answer is that the biggest coral I know about is probably the size of a football field or a cricket field or a baseball stadium.
Wow.
All the same individual. Give it 500 or 5,000 years, it can grow to fill a whole stadium. That's big.
We're going to go the other way, Kristen. We are going to go a question from Jude, which is, what is the smallest coral?
The smallest coral. Well, we just looked at the smallest coral life stage, but if we think about the smallest coral that never gets any bigger, even as an adult, it's probably the cold water corals that live across the coasts of cooler waters, around the Americas, around the Pacific, around the Atlantic. Sometimes they only get to be a few millimeters across, and that's their maximum size. Make a little baby, and then that baby grows to 5 millimeters,
Okay.
and that's it.
And is that Lophelia, or is that a different type of coral?
There's a bunch of them. They're called things like astrangia.
Okay.
let's see.
Because there are coral reefs off Scotland. People might not know that who are watching with these sort of deeper cold water corals.
So some of the colder water, and we call them solitary corals because they don't always branch. They don't always make copies of themselves. Some of those are pretty tiny.
Archie would love to know. We've just fed some coral babies some nice tinned mussel. What does coral eat in the wild?
What does it eat in the wild? Almost anything, I think. We know that corals are very flexible in what they eat. And that's partly because they have to be flexible because they're attached to the bottom of the ocean. So they can't go search for food. They have to wait to see what comes by. So there are, say a fish attacks another fish in the water column, and little bits of scales of that fish sprinkle down to the bottom. A coral might chew on that for a little while. At night, there's lots of plankton that come up into the seawater, little tiny shrimp and eggs from other animals, and all sorts of really cool, diverse small animals. And corals can grab those and eat them, whatever species they feel like eating. They can be very picky, even in a big soup. They can pick out what they want. But they have to adjust to whatever's coming by. So they have to be flexible about how much they eat and how long they wait, and they have to be flexible about where they get their fats and their proteins and their sugars. It's pretty diverse.
Amazing. Yeah, and yeah, not a fussy eater then.
You don't think about corals eating fish when you think about the food chain. Small animals get eaten by bigger animals,
Yeah.
but at the very top you got big fish. Sometimes corals eat the fish.
Brilliant. This is a great question, and from looking at that video of all the eggs going into the water, into the ocean, can you tell the type of coral when it's just an egg? Obviously, if you see the eggs coming out of a coral, you can tell, but if you just had the egg, how do you tell what coral it's come from?
I really like that question because one time I saw a coral. It was a pineapple coral, in fact, and it was spitting out eggs, and I thought, oh, it's spawning. We finally discovered it. We've seen a pineapple coral spawn. But then I noticed that the eggs that it was spitting out were the color and the size of brain coral eggs. We know that brain coral eggs is a big purpley pink ball of eggs with little white streaks. And I realized that the pineapple coral had eaten the eggs from the brain coral and was spitting them back out. But at first I thought it was spawning, and I was really excited. But it was just untasty eggs from a different coral that spawned.
And so, like bird eggs, I mean, you mentioned the color of a brain coral. I mean, is it a little bit of visual?
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference in color, and there can be a difference in the size of the bundles of eggs that they release. Now, when all the eggs are broken apart, and you just had maybe a petri dish of eggs, and you handed it to me, then it kind of just all looks like white dots. I would have a tough time telling a lot of them apart.
And I mean, so some people may have seen from television programs this whole idea of, you know, you can tell individuals by their genetics. Is that something that's possible to do, or do you just wait to see what happens to them when they grow up in the lab?
Ideally, we don't mix them up and then have to wait 2 years to find out which species they are. But you could do that if you really, really mixed everything up. Luckily, our system is to watch really carefully who released the eggs when we're catching them underwater. We have some big nets that we can put over a coral that's releasing eggs. So you really have to know your coral species ID, and then we write down what species it was. You can tell with genetics later on, but that's a much bigger process than seeing who spit the eggs out.
We've got a really small question from 5MP in Kiverton, which is how important is coral to the ecosystem, to the natural world?
Oh yeah, not that important. They're so important. They're the most important species, I think. Maybe I'm a little bit biased. They build the whole system. You know, they are building the structure of the reef. They're making homes that fish and worms and crabs live in. They are changing the way the water flows, so they're helping create water motion that brings food to other animals. That whole structure is protecting us on shore from storms and from big waves. So how important? Yes.
Very, 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 very important. We've got, Kristen, we've got five questions and 4 minutes.
Oh my gosh, this part is always really difficult.
Can coral see, feel, hear, eat, or breathe? That's from the owls at Sparkwell.
They can sense color, they can feel textures. What were the other ones?
Hear?
Hear? Yes, they can respond to pressure waves and sound in the ocean.
Breathe?
They exchange gas through their skin, but not the way we do.
Okay. So most of it, but not in the way that they don't have eyes, they don't have ears. It's more of a sensing, whole body sensing.
They have cells that can tell colors, and they have hair on their surfaces that can feel pressure, and they can move around and inflate their bodies with water to get more oxygen. So they do all the same things that we do, but they have really clever ways to do it since they don't have eyeballs and big lungs.
Elsa and Louis would like to know, what is the most common color of coral?
The most common color of coral, because they have algae that can live in their skin, that algae is kind of a yellowy brown color. So in many places, the most common color is kind of a bright orangey brown yellow color.
Amazing.
I had to buy some time for the next one.
Because it's really small question. These amazing questions coming through. Brilliant. How does the temperature of the water affect the growth of the coral?
How does temperature affect coral growth? Well, a little more temperature can speed up coral growth, but too much temperature hurts them a lot. So a little bit more temperature, just kind of like a plant grows faster in the summer than the winter, if you live in a place that has a summer and a winter. But a really, really boiling hot day, that's no good. So a little faster in the heat, but you don't want a fever.
Alice at Sparkwell, you're a marine biologist. What's that like?
What is it like? It's fun, it's challenging, it's hard, it's interesting. We get to learn new things every day, which is my favorite part. And we get to discover things that nobody ever knew before, and then we get to share those with the world, which is a huge privilege and a really fun thing to get to be a part of.
Amazing. We're going to go back to some basics on the biology front. Another question, which is obviously that in science, learning about male and female animals needed to create new life very often. Is that the same with coral, or the male and female corals?
Oh, that's a really good question. Sometimes a coral can be male or female, so it's releasing eggs or it's releasing male reproductive cells, but some corals can be both at the same time, and they can release both. So you do have corals that are male and female at the same time.
And it's the moment we've all been waiting for. This is the pineapple coral's new name. The top 3 to choose from. We had SpongeBob, which I'm going to discount because we'll come to sponges later this week, I think on Thursday, not a coral.
You can name a sponge SpongeBob, although I think that's a funny name for a coral.
Funny. But we have Spike, Chunky, and Piney.
Piney. Chunky. We had a crab named Chunk, so I feel like that name may have been already taken. So I think I'm going to go with Spike because I think that sounds cool and tough, and I feel like that'll give the little trooper a chance of holding its own in the ocean.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for all of the name suggestions. We have Spike, the pineapple coral, and we will do our best to update you on Spike's progress over the coming months and years. When might Spike be planted back onto the reef?
That's a great question. We're going to see how Spike grows for a little longer and see how big that thing gets. And They'll end up in the ocean eventually, but it might be a couple more years before we feel really safe that they're going to be safe.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's been fantastic seeing science in action. You've shared so much. You've shared about the coral reef, about life cycles, so how does an animal reproduce and grow. You've shared your science laboratory, so young people can see where science is done. You've shared your little friends here. It's been amazing, and through all of this, there's getting this idea of studying the natural world, asking questions about it, and on Friday we'll be looking at caring for coral. How can we put all that information together to look after this amazing environment better? But for now, it's a very big thank you to Kristen, very big thank you to all of those who have been watching, and it's a goodbye for now from AXA Coral Live and CARMABI. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. See you next year.